approximately 6,000 square feet of hangar space at the Airside Center. They've had an existing lease with us since March of 2016. They are seeking to amend the lease to extend their initial term. I believe the initial term that previously was a 5-year lease, and they're seeking to extend that lease to a 10-year term that would have a retroactive effective date of June 1st upon commission approval. It also contains one additional 5-year renewal option upon written agreement of the parties. The base rent will be $2,500 per month for the first 2 years of the initial 10-year term. Then after that, there will be an increase starting October 1st, 2023 of 2.5%, and then there'll be subsequent increases of 2.5% every other year during the remaining initial term of the lease. And thereafter, if the parties exercise their option to renew, then that base rent amount will be subject to negotiation. The base rent includes utilities, does not include taxes, which Lakeland Aircraft Maintenance will be required to pay.
Thank you. I see we have our director of the airport here today as well. It's good to see you, Gene, for a while also. I have a couple, what size aircrafts do they do mostly?
Well, they mostly do single-engine aircraft, but as of late, they've been doing much larger aircraft. They do King Airs, and they actually just rehabbed a Black Hawk helicopter.
Okay.
So they can do different aircraft types.
Do they have a paint shop too? Any paint shop?
They do not have a paint shop there.
Okay.
In this space as well, this is on the, if you recall at the airport, our round building with the 7 hangars on it. So this is the hangar that's on the furthest east side, and there are no bathroom facilities here. They share space. You know, there's no wall that separates them from the next tenant, so it's not the greatest space in the world, but they do a great business and get a lot of work done.
Do any of my commissioners, yes, Commissioner McCauley. Excuse me, yeah, McLeod.
One of the MCs, right? Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the current base rent?
I think they're just, go ahead.
2,000, was it?
$5.
I think it was just a little over $2,300 a month, and this is an increase to their existing rate.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So because there's no tenant separation walls between them, and that I assume that's why the electric is covered, but because they're a maintenance facility, what's the electric running? Do we have any idea? I mean, I guess it's not separated because
The electric, it's for the whole entire facility, so
Okay.
we have probably anywhere from 10 to 12 different tenants in there. And, you know, we charge a little bit more for the office space because obviously the HVAC and all of that, but out there in the hangars, it's, you know, it's just all shared space, and we pay the whole electric bill.
Is that the same place Lance is in there too?
Lance here?
Yes. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Commissioner McLeod.
Second.
And a second by Commissioner Music. If you, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That one passed unanimously. And then we have second order of business, and that will be,
I'll take that. All right, the second item is a second amendment to a ground lease with Tigertown GM Ltd. The city entered into a ground lease with Tigertown in September of 2019 for them to develop a multi-family affordable housing apartment complex on about 3 acres that the city owns just south of Tigertown. On Bella Vista Street. They're going to develop 88 affordable housing units in this multifamily complex on the property. When that lease was entered into, it was a 50-year lease, but it was anticipated that their lender might require a longer lease term, and so provided for an extension of the lease term up to 65 years. And sure enough, now that they're about to close on their financing, the lender is requiring a 65-year lease term. And so we are recommending that the lease term for this property be extended from 50 years to 65 years.
can you tell us the lease amount per year?
I do not have that information with me at the moment. I
Maybe
can get
Monday?
that to you on Monday.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So nothing else has changed, Palmer, it's just the term,
Just the term,
extending it
just
from
the
50 to
term.
65. Okay.
Yes.
So the question I had was what the amount was, so.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
And a second, Mr. Music? Okay. All those in favor, by signify saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It passes unanimously. Is there any other order of business that you'd like to discuss? Yes,
I
ma'am.
just had a quick question. Does that have an escalator on it?
On the rent,
Yeah.
let me get that on Monday. I'll
Okay.
get all the lease information on Monday.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I was just asking if that's typical that we
I know it was a, good deal for them. I mean,
Yeah.
we're trying to incentivize affordable housing, so it's not like
course.
a office or anything like that.
Cool. Thank you.
With that, our meeting is, all of our order of business is completed, and I will adjourn the meeting at 8:21.
Well, we are grateful for that, sir. Thank you. And we'll begin our agenda study at 8:30 as posted. We are grateful that Mr. Mustard got this organized and set up originally. Kevin's filling in very well and want to keep him in our prayers. It might be just at my end, by the way, but it's just a little soft when we're talking, so if people can talk slightly louder, that would be great. It's primarily hearable. I'd say we're 91% discernible, but it's mostly low volume speaking, so projecting is good. Thank you, Commissioner McLeod, who loves those communication edits.
So Joyce, Alex is saying the speaker is here, so when you present, if you would come to the front of the room, that would be fantastic.
And just FYI, when we had the other meeting, if they turn their head to the table, we lose them. So speaking toward the screen, I know seems weird, but you can only hear it that way. So just every time Joel turned his head the other day, we couldn't hear him.
Apparently, it's all from there.
From my perspective, it looks like the Wizard of Oz. approvals, then an approval of the consent agenda. That then brings us to, and so let's look on the approval of consent agenda of the asterisk items, which of course include the minutes, and then city manager item 5C. And City Manager Strauss, if you'd like to take that one, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, everyone. Nicole, Travis, and I are obviously attending virtually this morning. We're both at a professional conference over in Orlando, so we appreciate these technical resources to be able to do so. I do have staff and some of our department directors there in the room to answer questions on these items, but also if we have any technical difficulty, I've asked them to step in and take over my presentation. Under the city manager section, the first item for consideration under consent is item C. This is a recommendation regarding a contract with the Greater Tampa Bay Area Council, Boy Scouts of America, for purchase of state wetland mitigation credits and a corresponding appropriation to the Lakeland Lender International Airport Fund. The airport previously received approvals in February 2021 to proceed with Phase 3, Runway 9, ILS landing system project upgrades. Including in this project phase is the installation of stanchions required to support the lighting bars for the approach lighting system. The placement of the equipment is within an existing wetland, and the airport is required to purchase state wetland mitigation credits to offset this encroachment. To comply with this requirement, the airport is seeking to enter into a contract to purchase 0.32 state forested credits from the Greater Tampa Bay Area Council, Boy Scouts of America, in the amount of $54,400. The airport would be required to make payment within 30 days of execution of the contract. Staff will recommend that the City Commission authorize the city officials to enter into this contract, and there will also be an associated appropriation from the airport's operating fund surplus in the corresponding amount. That completes my presentation, and we'll stand for any questions.
Are there any questions in the room? Just raise your hand if so. Please, Commissioner Reed.
Are we gonna need any more credits out there?
Are we gonna need overtime? Oh, yes, sir.
Are they getting scarce again, or?
No, the Boy Scouts, I mean, there's another 1.5 credit, there's another 1.5 credits that are supposed to come online. Actually, they're supposed to come online last month, that we're going to purchase. But over time, as we continue to develop the airport with the new runway and all that, there will be a lot more credits that we will need over the years.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mayor. Can somebody remind me why we purchased from the Boy Scouts? I've forgotten why that's the group. That just stands out to me, that why are they the organization?
For the Alafaya Basin that we're in, they're the only ones that have credits for us that are available right now. So in the past, if you recall, we bought state and federal credits from the Boy Scouts. And they're the only ones in our basin that had the state and federal available. And now we just need the state, which is less demanding.
Okay.
Because we have credits that we're holding for Amazon's expansion.
Okay.
But we don't want to waste the state and federal credits. We're just taking these state credits at this point for the ILS system.
So they had purchased those credits at some point in the past to be able to sell?
Well, no, they're developing the land and creating wetlands, and then we're buying those credits so we can mitigate for the wetlands that we'll destroy over time.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. I just think when you read that, it just kind of, it seems odd that, yeah, it's the Boy Scouts of America. Thank you.
Nope. Trust me, I've every time it comes up.
Are there any other commissioner questions? All right, and then that's item C. So would your preference be to leave that on the consent agenda? If so, thumbs up. All right, we'll move on. Next, we'll go to item E in that same section on the recommendation for the Wood Environment and Infrastructure Inc. Change at Lake Bonnie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a recommendation, as you stated, regarding a task authorization with Wood Environment and Infrastructure for the Lake Bonnie Stormwater Retrofit Design and Permitting. A best management practices development preliminary implementation plan was completed for Lake Bonnie in November 2017 that evaluated the major pollutant loading sources to Lake Bonnie and provided recommendations for BMPs to reduce the pollutant loads to the lake. A pollutant control device was identified as an appropriate best management practice for one of the outfalls located near the intersection of US Highway 98 South and North Crystal Lake Drive. This outfall is the top 3 outfalls with the highest measured nutrient and sediment loading to Lake Bonnie. The Lakes and Stormwater Division sought a proposal from Wood Environment and Infrastructure, which is a professional lakes and wetland management service firm currently under continuing contract with the city to complete the design and permitting of the proposed pollutant control device. The task authorization and scope of services was included with major elements for the project. Funding for the Lake Bonnie Outfall Stormwater Retrofit Design and Permitting Project in an amount not to exceed $71,381.20 is provided in the fiscal year 21 Stormwater Utility CIP, and staff will be recommending to the City Commission to allow city officials to execute the task authorization with Wood for the Lake Bonnie Stormwater Project in the amount, again, not to exceed $71,381.20. That completes presentation of the agenda item, and again, staff is available for any questions.
Any questions on this item by the commission?
Do you have one?
My screen is not showing.
Commissioner Madden has a question.
There you go. If you mute Sean right away afterwards, then it allows me to see the room. Sorry. Questions?
Commissioner Madden.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Madden?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just thought since we have Lori in the room, and we haven't met together about where we are on stormwater mitigation, the different lakes and such, that if, we have a new harvester. I know at one point the county was not allowing us to use particular pesticides. Could you just give us an update on kind of where we are with our mitigation strategies for the stormwater in our various lakes?
Sure, I guess I'm gonna.
Stand up and project.
Project that way.
Well, actually, so FWC has allowed us to resume, and when I say us, I mean the county and us in concert, to resume the spraying of the lakes. It's much more structured than it used to be, so they require work plans, and they oversee it to make sure that they're not overspraying the lakes. And we meet with the county regularly so that they spray certain portions of the lake, we spray certain portions of the lake, and it's not being oversprayed, which is great for the environment. On the other hand, we have taken possession of our harvester. Many of you may have seen it. It's been in Lake Parker for months and months and months, and currently it's in Lake Wire. We are using it almost on a daily basis and have removed thousands and thousands of tons of nuisance and invasive vegetation out of the lakes. Our next proposed lake will be Lake Hollingsworth. That really needs some attention as well. So in respect to our aquatic plant management plans, we are full steam ahead and everything is working out very well.
Okay, and so we have obviously charge over, our lakes, and they're all kind of rated as to how much they need, support and mitigation. What about the stormwater ponds and, lakes in different neighborhoods? Is that the responsibility of the HOA? Does anybody check on those for excessive nutrient growth?
And that completely depends on if it's within a city easement. If it's a pond that takes our stormwater and we have an easement over it, then our drainage crew will maintain that pond. If it's a private property within an HOA, then we do not have jurisdiction to maintain those ponds, but we will work with the HOA and guide them on what they can do. We're always willing to meet with them and discuss what the issue is and how they can approach maintaining their own ponds. But if it's drainage that's within the city's actual stormwater drainage and conveyance, which we have easements on, we do maintain those. And we have a couple of ponds, like say the one that's on the north side of Lake Hollingsworth, we call that Southern Landings. We do sample that pond. There's another one over on Carpenter's Way. We sample that as well. We sample one within Lake Bonnie, and we're doing that mostly for research, to evaluate the methods that we're using and how well they're working.
Okay, and so if there was a citizen who lived in a neighborhood and they weren't sure if that was their HOA's responsibility, if it was a city easement, they could call the city and find out? Or if they saw excessive vegetation growing in some of their ponds, or they could reach out to the city and you could let them know that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Where do we, once we harvest the weeds and stuff, where do we take them to? Landfill, or we have a special?
We have a special place we take them to and to get composted, so they're reused in a beneficial manner.
Okay, good.
Any other questions on that? All right, our next item is 6. Thank you, Ms. Smith, for that. Our next item is 6C and item 1 under city attorney. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is also a task authorization with Wood Environment and Infrastructure. This is related to wastewater effluent as opposed to stormwater runoff, though. I think you're all familiar with 7 wetlands, and it's a series of cells that treat effluent from Glendale, mostly from Glendale, also from the Northside wastewater treatment plant, and then those waters are released to the waters of the state or sent to TECO for their power plant. There are a couple of control structures that separate some of the cells out there that are not operating as they should because of the buildup of sediment. As the memo indicates, the structures haven't been dredged since the wetland was created in 1986. So this is a task authorization with Wood Environment to survey what's there, figure out how deep the area of the sediment, the composition of the sediment, and then design a fix to the problem, which will include removing the sediment. It also is going to require that sediment be deposited, and the plan would be to deposit that on some uplands out in the wetland area. They will also assist with the bidding of the project and construction management services once the project is being constructed. Total not to exceed cost for the task authorization is $111,150. That's in Water Utilities 2021 budget. Is that loud enough, Mr. Mayor? Or?
Almost.
Almost? Okay, sorry.
Are there any questions on that? Commissioner McCarthy.
Palmer, why was it 30 years? Like, should we have done this earlier, or is this just a normal?
I think we have an individual that.
Hi, Malone. I can help with that.
Thank you.
It's just taken that much time for it to accumulate.
Okay.
We could have looked into it maybe a couple of years ago, but it took some time to identify those priority areas so that we didn't do a widespread, we didn't overdredge what was needed.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, so on a thumbs up basis on the 2 items that we just discussed, the one under city manager asterisk as well as this one, are you good to leave them on the consent agenda? Yes? All right, good. They stay. And then we go to finance director, and that's our appropriation and increases in estimated revenues for water, wastewater, and SRF fund.
Yes,
and Mr. Broussard.
Yes, good morning, everyone. The commission recently approved a contract for the English Oaks area to do $2.1 million worth of work on the last 2 remaining sections of the English Oaks project. And part of that was approving a loan with the Clean Water State Revolving Loan. That application has now been submitted within the last week. Water. And so now we are requesting an appropriation through the SRF fund, the State Revolving Loan Fund, for that $2.146 million.
Are there any questions by the commission at all on that? Thank you, Mr. Brossart. Would you like to leave that item as well on the agendas, consent agenda? Thumbs up, if so. All right, unanimously, I think, Commissioner Madden, there you go. All right, that brings us back then after consent agenda to the public hearings, second reading, and item 3A. Oh, I'm sorry, equalization hearing, item A. And I was going to ask the question, will we be able to post those in the meeting, Mr. Cook? Or is that troublesome to do? We'll post, okay. So equalization hearings will be posted and we'll have that list available. So lots and clearing, would you like to take this, City Attorney Davis?
Sure, just for the benefit of our new commissioner, what this is part of the process of as you know, there are a lot of lots, parcels around the city that are overgrown. The city will give notice to the owners of those properties and say, you need to cut your lot, your parcel. If they don't, ultimately, the city will hire a contractor to go out there and cut the grass. Sometimes there's debris that has to be removed and taken to the landfill. And so what we are required to do by the charter is hold an equalization hearing, and we provide notice to the property owners and give them an opportunity to come and object, saying, hey, you didn't need to cut my property. I've got someone doing that. You got the wrong property, or this is too high, or so every now and then somebody will show up to object or ask some questions. But this is a fairly regular process that we do, and this is the process on the way to recording a lien against those properties. We record a special assessment lien against the properties in the amount of our costs. And then ultimately every year in August, we will adopt what's called a non-ad valorem assessment roll and put all these different assessments on the tax roll. And so they are collected when people pay their taxes or if somebody buys a tax certificate for the property. So we have a pretty high collection rate in collecting these charges, but it's an ongoing process. And a lot of the names you'll see on there are names that are on there routinely.
So I assume when they go to assess the property, they've taken photos before and after and all that as documentation.
They do a great job of doing that, and code enforcement can show those pictures on the screen, and it's pretty clear what's going on usually.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Hayes.
How long do these municipal liens have to be on there before we can try to have a new owner on that property?
Have a new owner?
Yeah.
We have typically not sought to foreclose those. We collect them by collecting them on the tax roll. But there's no waiting period for foreclosure action.
They go right to this county assessment and they're coming by taxes. So if they don't pay, we collect anyway.
If they don't pay and someone buys their tax certificate, we get paid, correct?
Then they get sold on a tax certificate deed.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But we have typically not sought to foreclose these.
Right, okay.
Commissioner Madden.
So just kind of, since we're having an educational moment, I just thought that Commissioner Music could also know that this commission, it was brought to our attention by Commissioner Walker. He brought us several photos. And so we did kind of have a discussion about illegal dumping and a policy workshop and kind of crack down on it. So much so that I had code enforcement at my house not long after. My husband was complaining. I said, don't blame him, blame us, blame us. We are the ones that are cracking down on things like that. So, you might disagree because we all get our own opinion, but just so you know, that's something that this commission has addressed and looked into and had a workshop on, and so we're a little more serious about it than maybe we were in the past.
And that's where these get a little bit complicated, because every now and then you'll have a property owner who says, it's not my stuff, I can't keep people from dumping on my property.
Yeah.
So
Like a vacant lot or something.
Request that Mr. McCullough continue the great job of Mayor Pro Temping so that I don't complicate things, and I'll just raise my hand if I have an addition. Thank you.
If you raise. All right. Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions on equalization hearing? We also end meeting as a commission and then gavel out and become an equalization board and then gavel back in, just FYI. All right, agenda item number 3 on public hearings. We have a second reading, A1.
Yes, this is a vacation of a 3.5-foot strip just to the east of property at 119 Kearnywood Street. The owner of that property, I believe it's either a dental office or some kind of medical office, is seeking to do some renovations, which is triggering some ADA improvements that are required. So this property that we're vacating will allow them to construct an ADA ramp on the property to go along with their renovations. We've noticed the adjacent property owners, no objections. There is a property that accesses their garage past this little alley that this is a part of, and they have reviewed this and have no objection to it.
Any questions for City Attorney Davis? Okay, there's no Community Redevelopment Agency report, so we'll move on to item 5A with our City Manager Strauss.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Under the city manager section, the first agenda item that we have, item A, the commission is all aware of the conversation that we had on our last city commission meeting regarding the recommendation for award of a request for proposal number 1103 to Gallagher Benefit Services for employee benefits broker and consultant services. And after much discussion at the last city commission meeting, one of the questions that was posed that staff needed some time to work through from a kind of a technical math standpoint was related to local preference. And after all of the scoring was done, would there have been a difference made in the ranking had local preference been awarded and calculated for one of the respondents, Accentria? And so Joyce Diaz is with you there in the room this morning, and we've prepared a presentation to walk you through some of this detail to show you what the effect would have been had the local preference been applied to that one respondent's ranking. So with that, I'll turn that over to Joyce for presentation.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Joyce.
See if I can project.
Project, I was about to tell you to. Good job.
So what I've handed out to you and what you see on the screen is the chart that shows the scored card results and the methodology we used for the final score. And so during the interview and selection process, for ease of scoring, we do not score in a 100-point range. Routinely, we reduce the scoring point range so that it's easier for the reviewers. You're not trying to think, okay, what's half of 25, and try and figure out your points that way. And in this case, we used a point max of 5 for each reviewer, for each firm, for each of the criteria. So on the left, you see our selection criteria. We have 5 selection criteria. For each of the selection criteria, there's a maximum of 5 points, possible points that they could get on the scorecard for each reviewer, for each firm. And that would give them a total of 25 on the scorecard. If you see at the bottom, the scorecard total 25. When we get that total, we then turn it around and get it back to the 100-point range. So here on the midway down scorecard total, we take our 25 and turn it back into 100. So the scorecard totals that you see on the chart, the 58, the 48, the 42, and the 40 have been calculated back to the 100 and then multiplied by the 3 reviewers for a possible score, total score of 300. If the local vendor preference 10 points had been added, then the final score at the bottom would be the final score across the board.
Questions for Joyce?
Just the only thing that we're,
For now, yeah.
can we pull these people back up?
Questions?
I do.
Yeah, Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Joyce. Is there a reason the local preference score is added at the very end and not factored in with the other criteria?
Based in the ordinance language, the 10 points is added at the end to the final score. We can, if you want to pull up the slide, we can pull up the second slide.
I've lost my mouse here.
There's that guy. I'm sorry, the next slide afterwards, the one with the yellow highlight.
Here?
Yes. So this is the language directly out of the ordinance where under local vendor preference and for RFPs, so there are a number of different types of RFPs, RFQs, bids that this ordinance applies to. And under the RFPs, this is the language, and it's the total combined evaluation score that the 10 points is added to.
And for most RFPs, do we use the same methodology for, under 100 points and then getting it back to 100? Is it the same formula essentially for most of the bids?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I was just looking at the 10 points. When you add it that way, it does water it down compared to what, and I get it the way the ordinance is. I just wonder if that's something for consideration. It's really not that much of a boost the way it is here, as much as it could be. If that makes sense.
It's something, we've.
Just for discussion.
Yeah,
And
something we can discuss for
I think it
sure.
makes,
Yes.
I see the reasoning, I see the scores, but just, that was my first thought, is that local preference score, the way it's added at the end, I don't know how much that really makes a difference. I would be curious to see, are there others where that has actually put another firm into the first place?
Well, this is
ranking.
the first RFP that we've dealt with adding
Okay, that's right.
vendor
Okay.
preference. So this is kind of a
Right,
learning process
sure.
for all of us on this. Yeah.
Commissioner Reed?
I think most of our local preferences are, in a general, are dollar amounts, aren't they, as opposed to percentages? This one's more unique
Right.
than the rest of them. So a dollar amount was easier to determine than, I guess, the overall, whether it's 10, 12, 15, 25, or whatever the number is. I guess it's a little bit more unique from that standpoint, and I don't remember setting that criteria ourselves, but I know we did set the criteria on the dollar amounts.
Commissioner Music?
Thank you. Two questions. One, who were the reviewers? And you said there was 5 criteria, but if I look down at the cost line, I assume that was one of the criteria levels. They're all 0.
That is true.
So there was not 5, there was 4 criteria.
We did not score on the cost because last meeting, I showed you a chart, and we do have another one up here. The cost for fee-for-services between all of the 4 respondents were so varied in what they included and what they didn't include that we just didn't score it. It's still part of the 100, but it was impossible to make a comparison between them.
But I mean, all things being equal, money should be a serious consideration, right? I mean, if we're saying that these companies are worth evaluating, I would think that the dollar amount should be.
The dollar amounts were very close, but when you look at,
You want me to go, Joyce?
Yeah, I remember that slide at
Yeah.
the presentation. I don't remember the numbers.
let me find it, I apologize, I think it's the next one after the highlighted one, 5. Thank you. Yes. So I only showed the top 3 ranked firms. The other one was much more expensive and didn't rank up there in the top 3. So what you see here is in the fee for services, for some of them, we have some annual reports that are done through actuarial services, and some are included, some are not. And in some cases, like the GASB, it's $16,500 every other year. So that's a considerable difference in whether it's part of that annual fee or not.
And is that, and I apologize if this was already asked, is that because in the quotation request, we weren't specific enough for everybody to be giving us like, kind, and quality? I mean,
We did ask them to, elaborate what was included in their fee for services in the RFP. Yes.
Other questions? Commissioner Madden?
Well, I think it's great that you went back, and thank you for this educational moment again today. I would concur with Commissioner McLeod. we don't know what we don't know. Is this 10% or 10 points added at the end commensurate with a dollar amount addition on a dollar proposal? I don't know, how to kind of compare apples with oranges, but it would be interesting to know that in our ordinance, what we specify as a bump for a local vendor with regard to a dollar amount, how does that compete or compare with this 10 points added at the end versus added earlier in the scoring process? So we certainly don't want to, bump up someone who's not qualified to where we have, local vendors doing work for the city that are not, stellar in their work. But it does look like if it was added at 48, then they would have been tied versus 10 after they've been multiplied by 4, as a smaller incremental increase. So, but it might be commensurate. I don't know, again, if you take the dollar, and I'm looking at Palmer for kind of guidance.
I've got the numbers in front of me for just straight bids where you're just looking at dollar amounts. There's a local preference of 10% if the bid is under 250,000. If it's between 250,000 and 500,000, the percentage benefit for local preference is 7.5%. Between 500,000 and $1 million, it goes down to 5%, and then above $1 million, the local preference is 2.5%, up to a maximum cap of $100,000. And it's hard to apply to an RFP because, once again, you're not just looking at widgets and prices. You're looking at a lot of more subjective factors.
I actually have a question, Joyce. Is this grid what we couldn't see a couple weeks ago? Like, this is the same as it was?
Yes. Yes.
The only difference is that you applied the local preference at the bottom?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And that is assuming the local preference applies. That's still not a completely clear issue, to be honest with you.
Right. But it's good for us to take this time since it is our first time addressing it, since we've had the ordinance.
Yes, Commissioner Reed.
If we look at the dollar amount of local preference, then we would be awarding it to Foundation Risk. Is that a fair statement? Because we have to be a 10% difference. It's 125,000 versus 128. Is that where I would get the number from?
I think the problem with that, though, is if you see some of the other boxes there, it's not clear what's included in their 125,000.
Right, that may not be the bottom line dollar figure. And that's why we didn't score it.
I call myself, sorry. And so when we're talking about this, like, I'm struggling, I think, like Commissioner Reed, with the difference between how this is laid out as, this is an RFP, right? Not an RFQ as qualification. So this is an RFP, and we're looking at all these different numbers. So it does seem like apples and oranges. So then why do we have the process? Does that make sense? If we don't have the exact steps in the process to measure out what that final number is, if we're not gleaning the information we need to make the decision, I think that's what we're struggling with.
When we look at the chart, the points awarded to different criteria. So there's more than just a cost factor that's important here. And the cost was only, 20% of the total 100. So those other criteria were important factors and, weighed on that total score.
But it's not even calculated.
Right, but it's all at zero. So that's not even calculated into the...
And the thought process is, we didn't know what that total score was, so it was hard to consider that.
I would assume it's a little hard to discover the exact experience and qualifications and the dedicated account service team and experience and the approach and methodology. Some of those others may be a little more nebulous when the actual judges are looking at those. They might not have conclusive evidence that they're a 5 or a 4 or a 3 based on the other criteria as well. Would that be true, not having used those firms before? If I'm the judge and I'm looking at experience and qualifications of the broker managing all benefits for the City of Lakeland employees, certainly Gallagher, it's easy to score because we have that personal experience, but we're more or less guessing based on past experience of the other firms.
Well, I can tell you the book was about this thick for each of the submittals. There's a lot of information that we asked them to submit to us, and it was all that detailed information. There were a lot of questions. We go through and ask everything that we need, or we think possibly we might need. What's your, what can you do for us within those answers? And then we invited them in for a presentation and an interview. So if we hadn't gotten enough information from what they submitted, we had more questions for them, and we spent 45, 50 minutes, sometimes close to an hour, with each of the firms, getting to know their team, finding out how they interact with us, what more answers to some of the questions that they could provide us, so that we can make a better informed
So I
decision.
guess that's what we're saying, you could have done the same probably with the cost, to drill down a little deeper.
It seems to me that it's a very subjective process. Understandably so, because it is so complicated, so it is a little more subjective, so you are going to feel more comfortable with Gallagher because you speak the same language as them, you know what I mean? And so I think that the subjectivity of it, when we try to apply an objective metric, is where we are getting into a gray area. I think we're trying to make it as objective as possible with having a scoring system and having these parameters that we work within. However, there's still some human subjectivity to the process, and I think that's just where I'm personally struggling with it.
Well, and I don't want to project other scenarios on this scenario, but we're using it as learning curve. And I've seen in the past, specifically with some Lakeland Electric things that I've brought to the attention of the commission, where it does, it's hard to be completely objective when you know one company and they're going to come through because of past experience, and the other one might be a little bit more of, I'm not sure. And so that could, applying your scoring, and so then that local player doesn't get the shot. And on the scenario I'm mentioning, it was a factory tour could have been taken, and that could have been solved very easily. It's just down the road because it's a local person. But in the judging process, it's just easier and human nature to want to go with those folks that came through with you before and kind of ignore the local vendor preference. So I think we're kind of trying to be a little bit more critical this first time, because we don't often get this chance to kind of hash through a real life, situation so close after having a new ordinance in place.
Commissioner Music?
Yeah, so two things. One on that, I also think that there should be a value and a comfort level to somebody that the city has worked with for 20 plus years. I mean, there's certainly a value there. But we're also going off of the assumption, and the city attorney said this, we don't know yet that they are truly, even though we know the gentleman in the audience, since they've sold the company, is it still a local company? I mean, so we're going down a road not sure if they do or do not qualify for local preference anyway.
So we're really using all these questions for an educational moment more than we're doing it for this specific scenario.
Commissioner McLeod?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I would just coming back to the 10 points at the end, I understand the rationale for that and may contradict my earlier statements, but with Commissioner Madden's point about we want vendors, qualified experience who are able to do the job. And so you don't want to see local preference put somebody in front of the most qualified, but you also want it to be significant enough that if the qualifications are essentially the same, that it would give them that edge. So I just think it's something we keep an eye on in future bids to see, is it effective, is the way we've got it structured in the ordinance, whether it's the 10 points or the dollar amount, is it effective in allowing us to bring in more local vendors?
Mayor Mutz?
I would like City Attorney Davis to weigh in on this, but I don't want to remove my understanding from this conversation is that the commission can override the recommendation. And we use a process to try and keep that objective, but we do have that prerogative, do we not?
Yes, you do. It has to be based on some kind of rational basis. So you need to show why is the selection committee's rankings. What about it's incorrect, and have some kind of rationale for that. There's not a whole lot of guidance in state law on local purchasing practices, but the lodestar is that it cannot be arbitrary and capricious. It has to be based on some kind of rational factor. So, yes, you could override it, but you certainly need to articulate why and what the basis was.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Madden.
So just before Monday, it looks like if, to City Attorney Palmer's, Davis's point, if the 10 points would have made the difference, then we would have some rationale to not necessarily have to make sure that they were local. We could just use that we think they're local, they came in above with the additional 10 points. But now that they're not above on the additional 10 points and we're not sure they're local, it's a stretch to think that we have legal rationale to override the committee.
I think if the 10 points made a difference, we would dive more deeply into, are they truly local? I mean, in this case, I mean, some of the principles behind it have clearly been around for a long time. The named company that we'd be doing business with, Foundation Risk Partners, is out of Daytona Beach. Their local business license in Lakeland was pulled in, I believe, September of 2020, which is less than the 1 year that the ordinance calls for, to qualify as a local business under our ordinance. So it's a little bit of a mixed thing that we'd want to dive into more deeply, and that's partly why we decided, does it even make a difference in this case before diving into all that?
Okay. Well, I think that on Monday, for me, I would like to just, kind of say, going forward in all of our, RFPs, to take a look at that addition of the 10 points at the very end versus, after the initial scorecard tallying. I think that we should think about the things today that we discussed that, are some outliers, to look at, going forward, since it's the first time we've used the ordinance on this kind of RFP. I just want to make sure that we did a good job on our ordinance and that we are massaging that and we are thinking critically about the ordinance to make sure it is doing what we hope it does in the future.
And one last thing, Attorney Davis. So if what the mayor brought up, and if this commission decided we would not go with the committee recommendation, we went with someone else on the list, that doesn't guarantee a legal next step. It may give grounds, but it doesn't affirm that definitely somebody would say anything. They might just bow out naturally. So do you understand what I'm saying?
If one of the vendors felt like there wasn't a rational basis for your decision, they could file a lawsuit to challenge it.
But that
They
would
won't
be the
necessarily.
outcome. That would be the only outcome, is that they could do a lawsuit. So that's just we're just guessing at that. That's a hypothesis. That doesn't guarantee if we voted to go another pathway with another vendor, that would guarantee that step would happen.
That would be up to the vendor that felt like they had been,
Right. But as a governing board, our job is to make decisions like that, whether or not there's a potential for a lawsuit. Yes?
I think you should certainly keep that in mind, yes. We spend a lot of money defending lawsuits.
Right. I am aware of that.
Yeah.
We signed off on the bill.
Right.
I know that. But I'm just, for clarity purposes and for educational purposes, we as a commission, it still comes down to, as policymakers, we can make that decision of who that bid goes to based on the information that we're provided.
Yes, I think you just need to make sure you have a rational basis for it.
Okay. And then would it be legal action after, or is there a protest period after a commission makes a change to a?
The bid protest procedure in our purchasing policy is an administrative process that goes into effect after the notice of intent to award is issued by the purchasing director. Once it gets to the city commission, that period is passed. The challenge at that point would be in a court of law.
Okay. Commissioner McLeod, you have?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Everybody good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Palmer. All right, moving on, City Manager Sharous, 5B.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Item B is regarding award of bid number 1076 to Waller Construction for ADA restroom renovations at the RP Funding Center on February 15, 2021. The City of Lakeland issued a request for bids for ADA restroom renovations at the RP Funding Center located there on Lime Street. The project included ADA upgrades of 7 interior restrooms in the RP Funding Center. The work will consist of replacement of plumbing fixtures, partitions, tile, and dispensers in the restroom. On March 19, 2021, the city's purchasing department received 7 bids. Due to the bids being greater than the available budget, an agreed-upon reduced scope with Waller Construction was reached at $677,615. This reduced the number of restrooms being upgraded by 4, so that means there would be 3 restrooms that would be upgraded, and it also changed the size of the tile being used in some of these locations. And so it is will be recommended by staff that the city commission authorize the appropriate city officials to execute the contract with Waller Construction in the amount of $677,615 for the renovation of 3 restrooms at the RP Funding Center. Staff is available for any questions.
We have any questions? Commissioner Reed?
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, up there.
It's actually going to be directed to Tony. Which 3 are we going to remodel?
The main ones.
The ones, the biggest ones or the closest?
Yeah, the biggest ones, that are remaining in our public way, are the ones that are being fixed and restored. The back of the house, we had one in our office space, we had one in the kitchen, there was one in the Magic's area, which is really a private office area, and the one other area I can't recall, but they were all back of the house. So these are our main restrooms that you would use, the commissioners would use, and our guests would use. Public, yeah.
Mayor, did you hear that? It's the main visitor restrooms that will be accessed by public.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? Commissioner Madden?
So I think that clarifies it for me because they're bigger, the ones that are left, but it did look a little fishy that, we're removing 4 of the 7 and only reducing the cost by a 5th.
When you're dealing with construction money, it's, maybe Richard could help me with this, but it's a lot to deal with. Trust me, I would have liked to have got them all done, and we just tried to find the best way to get done. The tile cost was a big part of it. We're dealing with Strong Trout Architecture. They spec these really big, beautiful tiles, and the difference in price between those big, beautiful tiles and the smaller tiles that we're going to be using was a lot of money. And as you know, construction costs are high right now, so we're dealing with that as well.
I just hope that the value engineering of the 5th of the price is worth going with only 3 of the 7.
Yeah, truly.
So they're smaller. Those other 4 must be really small compared to the 3.
Ours is one stall bathroom. The kitchen's a 1-stall bathroom that was taken out.
Okay.
The other one actually was in one of our boardrooms that we use as a wedding room.
Mm-hmm.
That one's not going to be addressed, and the shower stays instead of going away. And then the other one's in the kitchen. So they're really single stalls.
All right, that helps.
Mayor Mutz?
Here, hang on.
Kevin's going to control your mute.
Go ahead.
I think what you're sensing in these comments, I would concur with my fellow commissioners. The quality of the restrooms is very, very important. Our problem is timing. It's construction timing and it's construction costs. And so to defer to a smaller project, a smaller level of this at the present time, and not overvalue engineering it, and maybe even doing less in order to make sure we do it well and do it right, is probably the preference. And then hopefully when we get to a period of time where construction costs get more normalized, we could work on what's still outstanding.
Thank you. Other Commissioner Music?
So we had this amount budgeted.
This is a holdover from our original $14-ish million budget, which half was funded by the city and half was funded by the county. So when we got done with the major projects that we got done, we always had this as an additional, much needed. So when we got done with that project, there was a little bit of money left, and that's what this project is.
The renovation of
The renovation.
Yeah. Give him a little overview, because he's probably not privy.
Yeah, so again, we went out for funding, talked to the commission about our renovation project probably 5 years ago. When I got here, it was ongoing, and the project was about an upgrade to the space, a facelift, if you will. One of the things that came along is the Magic, and we spent some money on the arena to make improvements there for that project. So we did a little bit of a left turn on that, but I think the most important piece that we did was the facelift to our meeting space, because our meeting space is really going to be our future. So when you go into the building, you'll see those improvements more than anything. So when we got done with that project, which took 3 years, there was a little money left over. COVID started. You know, we were dealing with this project during COVID, but we're able to work on design and get these restrooms upgraded. And it was one of the things that was important to the commission at that time, and I think Commissioner Madden.
The girl restrooms are terrible.
So
They're worse than
So when you're saying there was a little money left over, is $677,000 a little money? So that money is there to cover this cost, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so give me a visual. What is the size of the restroom, and how many fixtures are we talking about? Because, you know, $220-something a piece, I can build a small house with a bathroom and a kitchen. And so I'm struggling here for just a minute, so I'd like to.
Well, the main restrooms in the main corridor, they're probably, they're 3-stall men stalls, and then 4 urinals. The women's, I believe, is an 8-stall. So that's one grouping.
Okay.
The next grouping is down the hallway. There's a.
Okay, pause real quick. So when you're saying grouping, so when we're doing 3 restrooms, that's a men and women's combo.
Correct.
So it's a total of 6.
Correct.
3 of each.
Correct.
Feel a little bit better. Okay.
That helps, yeah,
Okay,
that
good.
helps.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
When we're going down by Hollingsworth, I don't remember, in the women's, it's probably a 4-stall.
It's 4.
And a 2-stall for the men. And then when you go down by Sykes, it's I want to say it's a 3-stall for men, so it's probably a 6-stall for women. So those are our largest public restrooms.
And so we're not talking about moving plumbing, we're talking about renovation.
Correct.
Fixture for fixture, going back and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Mostly, the plumbing is mostly intact, but it's,
There's some small amount of plumbing that have to be moved to be new.
New requirements and stuff, okay.
and there are ADA enhancements that were required by the city a few years ago that are part of this project, and that really is an expensive piece as well. All those ADAs are
Not
upgrades.
particular to the bathrooms, but part of this is the DAC report, where the city did a DAC report to start identifying ADA issues across the
Right.
city, and so it became part of that talk during the remodeling process.
And so what do we have as our, because we've taken several of the restrooms off, but yet they were obviously on the agenda because they need to be done. What's our future for that?
We're going to be working on that. It's
Okay.
future funding.
Okay.
We might be doing that with CIP money in the years to come. But at the moment, they are usable, so we'll continue using them, and we'll get them as we go, probably with CIP money.
These have or have not ever been renovated prior to construction? Do we know?
These are original to the building.
Okay.
Amen.
Painted, maybe, but
Okay. All right, thank you.
much needed.
Even with the Miss Florida pageant coming in there original. Thank you. Other questions? All right, City Manager Rouse, we can move on to D.
Thank you. Item D is a recommendation to award of a request for qualifications number 1060 and approval of continuing contract and agreement for professional solid waste management and consulting services with Geosyntec Consultants and Resource Recycling Systems. On February 1st, 2021, the city issued a request for qualifications for professional solid waste management consulting services with the intent of awarding multiple tasks that can be utilized in developing a comprehensive solid waste and recycling master plan. On March 2nd, 2021, purchasing received 5 submittals for the advertised consulting services. City staff reviewed the submitted qualifications, conducted in-person interviews and presentations with each firm, and determined Geosyntec Consultants and Resource Recycling System to be the most responsive and qualified firm. Subsequently, a notice of intent to award was issued on April 5th, 2021. Staff now seeks approval to enter into a continuing contract and agreement for professional solid waste management and consulting services with both Geosyntec Consultants and Resource Recycling Systems. And this will be an initial contract term of 3 years with 2 one-year renewals included. There was a full scope of work that was included with each of these responses. Funding for the future projects is provided in the FY21 through FY25 solid waste fund. And again, we have staff in the room available to answer additional questions.
Questions?
Commissioner McLeod.
Commissioner McLeod, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It mentions in here that we're developing a comprehensive solid waste and recycling master plan. Are we building on an existing plan? Is this something that's being built from scratch? I'm just curious.
This is something that will be built from scratch, and we will be looking at, there are multiple possible projects that we could use this consulting firm for. There's cost-benefit analysis for possible future enterprise fund projects. There's a rate study that we're going to probably have to do in the next year or two for solid waste services. And then ultimately, we would develop a solid waste master plan from probably most of that work that we do.
Gene, I'm just curious. Thank you. That's helpful. How do we get to the point to decide we need to bring in somebody to help to structure this?
Some of these projects they're beyond our internal expertise as far as solid waste management. There's possible engineering services we would need and possible environmental services that we would need that are beyond the scope of our in-house staff for solid waste management. So that's, it's based, this is really going to be a contract that we use for specific projects. There is no cost as long as the contract is in place. We'll come back to you with a task authorization when we do have those projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions, Commissioner Madden?
Well, number one, I'm so excited about the Recycle Heroes, so I just want to say it while you're here. Yes.
Superstar.
I'm going to really have to up my game.
Up your game.
Yes. So second, of course, we're all curious about all the federal money that they're printing out there. And just curious about, this environmental study and master planning. Does that give us any kind of cred to get Fed money on any of this infrastructure, solid waste infrastructure?
It definitely can, and that is a component of that consulting firm and bringing them on board. Would be to certainly look at grant funding that are opportunities for future projects.
Okay.
So definitely for recycling.
Yes, if it's money that can be leveraged, then I'm all about it.
Absolutely.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right, City Manager Strauss, we're on to item F.
Thank you. Item F is a recommendation regarding award of bid number 1042 to Cobb Site Development, approval of construction agreement with Cobb Site Development, and task authorization with DRMP for construction, engineering, and inspection services for the State Road 572, Drainfield Road at Don Emerson Drive intersection improvement project. This intersection improvement project will construct a single-lane roundabout with associated safety enhancements. The project will include road widening, curb and gutter, drainage, pavement markings, signage, lighting, and landscape improvement. Construction plans were prepared by Patel Green and Associates and were approved for construction by the Florida Department of Transportation. The city's purchasing division advertised for construction bids beginning January 11, 2021, and on February 11, 2021, proposals were received by the city. The city's public works staff evaluated the bid responses and determined that Cobb Site Development would be the lowest responsive bidder. FDOT provided concurrence with the city's recommendation, and a notice of intent to award was issued by City Purchasing in March 2021 to Cobb Site Development. The protest period ended without any objection. Construction and engineering inspection services, what we call CE&I, are required during the construction of the project. Therefore, the city's Public Works Department solicited a proposal from DRMP, one of the city's municipal engineering continuing contracts, to provide the CE&I services. for the intersection improvement project. Under a task authorization, DRMP will provide those services at the negotiated fee of $254,562.50. Construction costs associated with the project are budgeted within the transportation fund and will be fully reimbursed through a joint participation agreement with the FDOT in the current fiscal year. The necessary CE&I services are also currently budgeted within the transportation fund through an internal loan that will be paid through impact fees. So therefore, it will be recommended that the City Commission authorize the award of the bid to Cobb Site and allow city officials to execute the construction agreement in the amount of $2,190,021.11. And is also requested, or will be requested, that city officials execute the task authorization for the CE&I services with DRMP. That completes presentation of the agenda item. And again, we have staff in the room to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? All right. Thank you, City Manager Sherrouse. We'll now move to City Attorney Davis. He has a long list of ordinances.
Sure, and hopefully we're going to be able to throw off the maps on the.
Teresa's,
she has. Okay.
There you go.
All right, the first two items relating to a proposed residential development just across from Larson Power Plant on the north of 92, east of Lake Parker. Teresa, you ready to go?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, so this is the subject site. As City Attorney Davis mentioned, it's east of Lake Parker. It forms the easternmost limits of the city on US 92. It serves as a gateway to the city of Lakeland. This is a zoomed-in view of the subject property. You can see that it's mostly vacant pasture land. There are some buildings shown on the bottom of the property. Those have all been removed since the time that this aerial was taken. There are several actions being requested. The first is a change in future land use on the property. There is both residential and commercial future land use, with the commercial being along the US 92 frontage. And the request is to change that mixed commercial corridor land use to residential, and that's shown in this hatched area, to allow for a 199-unit subdivision. The remaining commercial corners at East Lake Parker Drive and at Fairway would remain as outparcels to the development. This is just a view of the property looking to the north. You can see Lake Parker there. The property was originally developed back in the 1920s as a country club and golf course. But again, it is vacant now. The most recent uses were a mobile home sales operation, and then a liquor store and a billboard had occupied the site. Looking from 92 to the north and the west, you can see the Larson Power Plant there on the left side. The zoomed in view of the power plant. This is looking from East Lake Parker Drive into the site. From the site out across to the lake, and this lakefront is part of the subject property, so the parcel boundaries do extend out to Lake Parker. In reviewing this request, the staff relied quite a bit on some prior studies that had been prepared, one of those being the East Lake Parker West North Cumbie area-wide plan. This was a plan that was conducted in 2015, so it followed the annexation of this property and future land use being applied in 2012 and 2013 respectively. Once those actions were completed, this plan was undertaken through a Environmental Protection Agency grant, a Brownfields grant, and it was a collaborative effort with Polk County, City of Lakeland, the Regional Planning Council, and property owners in the area. The plan had specifically identified this property as a catalyst site, so not unlike some of the other city planning efforts. It set up a vision for the property, and the vision was to have a mixed-use development with multifamily up at the northern part of the property, commercial along the frontage, and then a mix of assisted living and civic uses in the center of the property. So consistent with this plan, the city also, with the county, undertook the East Lakeland Sector Plan. And again, you can see on this map, there's a star here, which indicated this as a mixed-use commercial center. So the current request is for a single-family subdivision. As originally submitted, the request was for 209 lots. That would be all 40-foot wide lots. That proposal was presented to the Planning and Zoning Board in February, and at the Planning and Zoning Board's March meeting, they did deny this request without prejudice to allow the applicant to come back to address some of the concerns that the staff and the board had about the lot mix within the development. So there was a concern that it was all 40-foot lots, and the recommendation was for there to be some 50-foot lots incorporated into the development. The layout also had a cul-de-sac up at the top that was pointed out as being a concern. We wanted to have greater connectivity through to East Lake Parker. And we had hoped that there would be a reduction in the residential across Memorial Boulevard, so that MCC future land use would have remained. However, the applicant wanted to retain the ability to do residential there and wanted to still pursue the future land use change for the residential. So following that action, the applicant submitted a revised site plan, and that was presented to the Planning and Zoning Board in May. And this plan did eliminate that cul-de-sac up at the north. It also placed some 50-foot lots along the western portion of the development. And that mix totaled approximately 25% of the overall total number of units. And then they also reduced the number of units down to 199. And they as well had agreed to provide a greater usable rear yard for the lots, because as initially proposed, there was a very minimal setback for the rear yard lot lines. So in staff reviewing this revised request, there were still outstanding concerns about what types of uses there would be in the commercial portions. Staff also looking at the land development code and what minimum requirements are for any other property that would be developed under our standard zoning designations. There's a minimum lot width of 50 feet. So we had asked for the developer to look at a minimum of 50% of the lots to be 50 foot. Also with the garage width relative to the front of the buildings, there's a minimum in the land development code on that for 50-foot lots. But again, because the code doesn't allow for 40-foot lots, we had recommended that those garages be limited to no more than 71% of the total frontage of the building. There was a concern about how this development would look from the street side, so from 92 and from East Lake Parker. So we wanted there to be some significant buffering and fences to shield what could be backyards of homes. And, all of this, again, was really recommended in light of this being a planned unit development. So with planned unit developments, the intent is that the developer is presenting something that's unique and different in order to, seek a development that's not otherwise allowed by standard zoning. So at the Planning and Zoning Board hearing, the Planning and Zoning Board, in response to a request by the developer, did recommend that only 35% of the lots needed to be 50 foot wide. They also recommended to eliminate the limit on the garage width to no more than 60% of the overall width of the front elevations of buildings. And then there was quite a bit of discussion about transportation conditions. And, the developer was concerned about what they perceived to be city staff recommending conditions that, and improvements that would be otherwise required by reviewing agencies who had jurisdiction over the adjoining roadways, being FDOT for US 92, and then the county for Eastlake Parker Drive. So there was a condition added that just clarified those requirements for a traffic study, which we had hoped to have had at the time of zoning, but a full traffic study was not prepared. We had asked for at least an operational analysis to deal with the intersection of Eastlake Parker Drive and US 92, and then Fairway Avenue over on the east side of the property and US 92. So it was recommended for approval by a vote of 6-0 with the changes that were recommended by the Planning and Zoning Board. And also included in those changes was a revised site plan showing 50-foot lots now along the east side of the development, adjacent to existing property or a residential development within the county, and then the 50-foot lots on the western side of the development as well. That's an overview of a pretty complex and development proposal that took, you can see 3 months, 4 months to come through the process, with the applicant initially being denied and then coming back. We do have a number of slides dealing with transportation if there are some more specific questions related to that. But otherwise, I would answer any questions that you may have.
Do you have any questions from Commission? Yes, Commissioner Music.
Thank you. The track buffer, landscaping, fencing, whatever we're going to have there, is that something that's outlined prior to, approval, so that we know what we're getting, as opposed to driving down that road and seeing, what do we have, 30 lots there with different fences and things like that? What's our expectation there?
Right, so exactly, and that was the staff concern. So there is a condition now as part of the ordinance that will require a masonry structure along the frontage. So it'll be a unified fence. And then the buffer, I believe, and let me look at that to make sure I have the condition correct. I believe it's a 20-foot wide buffer. And then we specify landscaping material within that buffer. So that, yes, it would be a consistent fence along the street frontage.
Yes.
And we do or do not have concerns with the 3 entrances and exits that we have to do, as far as, you figure you've got 200 lots and 2 cars a person. You got, a family, you got 400 cars entering and exiting. What's the expectation? You said a study hasn't been done yet, but what are we thinking on that? I mean, are we going to require a study prior to approval?
So now the trigger would be prior to site plan or subdivision review, but there are still conditions remaining in this recommendation that's coming forward to you that has recommended improvements, but then the condition says that if the reviewing entity, say FDOT or the county, says that those conditions aren't required, then we would defer to those agencies. I know that Chuck is in the room, and I do have those slides available if you want us to run through them, or Chuck can verbally explain what the transportation and traffic concerns are.
Do you want Mr. Barmby to?
No, and that's okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that there was going to be another step addressing that until the developer builds it, and then all of a sudden the city or the DOT is on the hook for infrastructure repairs afterwards. Who is the developer?
The developer is Highland Homes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes. I look at this property every day.
Yes, you do.
I live by this house, this property, and invariably, I knew the 3 owners. It's down to 1 now. The property has outlived the landowners, unfortunately, and there's 1 left. And the challenge is you've got the power plant to the one side, the railroad's right across the street with FMC right in the neighborhood. And of course, you've got mobile homes in a very mixed community along Golfview, Burns, and so I commend their taking a risk and taking this property and challenging. Of course, they're getting, with the cost of construction and everything, your lot costs have gone through the roof. Invariably, I'm glad we're going to have something there. I know they tore down the liquor store. Unfortunately, to answer your question, there's a light on either corner. So it's not going to be that challenging to get out.
Okay.
And of course, on the back, they can always go to the north on Lake Parker and somewhere, and invariably, people will find their way through here. But yes, from that point, the question I have, Teresa, has the developer agreed to all of the points that y'all come back to so far? Is this do y'all have a consensus between yourselves?
The developers' requests that were recommended by the Planning and Zoning Board, yes, they are in agreement with those.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Madden?
Thank you, Teresa. So when I'm thinking about the places, we need housing and where folks that are moving to Lakeland can live, I'm so appreciative for our staff, not only thinking about things like traffic, but inside the development. Certainly it's not our private land, and we're not the developer, but every tweak that you make that gives those residents quality of life aspects that they may not have had prior to are so appreciated by me in particular, because I try to think about any resident of Lakeland, if they moved into a new development, what are the quality of life features? And so even things like the stormwater ponds, I've seen in other neighborhoods, they become a great amenity. They bring wildlife to the area. I'm looking at this private fishing pier, and I'm concerned that there's no pedestrian access to their private fishing pier and to their green area. Certainly, we're mitigating the views of the power plant, which I don't think anyone would love to look at, but a lake should be enjoyed and looked at, and I'm hoping that so is there no multifamily now in this?
That's correct. So, right. Previously, there was a proposal for multifamily, and that was through a tax credit project that did not receive funding. And that's what initiated the zoning, the multifamily zoning that's already there today.
Okay. Well,
this is all single family.
So if you can't have views of a lake, you should certainly have pedestrian access. So would they go out the main roads, or is that little green space that goes across the two retention ponds, that'll be obstructed by the cement wall?
That's the pedestrian.
There is. Right, so you'll see in the center here.
A wall opening?
This was one of the things that we asked for, was this pedestrian pathway out to East Lake Parker Drive.
Great.
To then provide access out to the dock.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you.
Other Commissioner Music?
Would you mind going back to the slide previous that had the...
This one?
Yes, that's correct. So I didn't have questions until I read that. So the major traffic studies required, developer proposal is 4.5 times in excess of the threshold. So that's a pretty big deal. So how are we thinking that is going to be?
Well, and this was really an essence of our concerns about traffic, is that at the time of zoning, and particularly when we're talking about a planned unit development, we have to, as the land development approval authority, we have to put a package together to figure out how to get people in and out and around the site. So under normal circumstances, we would require a major traffic study prior to zoning action so that we would know specifically what conditions to write into the zoning ordinance. We did not have that. So what we did is calculated just based on strict land uses through the Institute of Transportation Engineers, what the typical daily and AM and PM peak traffic would be. And then the developer provided distribution model of that traffic. So we came up with some rough numbers. But because of the scale of this project in its entirety, not just looking at the residential, but also the commercial component, that's where we started to have concerns about the network out here. East Lake Parker Drive, it's a fairly narrow cross-section. We know that the county is going to end up requiring some type of turn lanes or maybe some other improvements on their road. Fairway, we really pushed for a secondary access to Fairway Avenues to not push everybody out to Eastlake Parker Drive. And so Fairway is not really your standard local street. It does have a traffic light at 92, but because of the amount of traffic coming in and out, we feel that turn lanes are going to be needed, and we wanted to go ahead and get that in the ordinance so that it's kind of sets expectations from the very beginning.
Right.
The turn lanes on US 92 are all substandard. They don't meet today's length requirements, and so we wanted to make sure that was covered as well. Because under state statute, as soon as we approve zoning, we lose most of our leverage when it comes to making concurrency determinations. So we wanted to go ahead and get as much of this documented and in the ordinance today as much as possible. The other thing too is that if we don't address transportation as part of a package now, what we will end up seeing is that the residential component will come forward first. And the residential component will have its own traffic generation and its own access issues. But when the commercial comes along, and then the next commercial comes along, we're not looking at everything in its entirety. So there's at some point, we're either not looking at the full impacts of the development because it gets done in a piecemeal fashion, or we end up with somebody, the last development coming in, being stuck for a huge tag potentially because they're tripping the concurrency threshold. So that's why getting these conditions locked down as much as we can now is critical. And even though DOT and the county are the actual permitting authorities for the design of the improvements that are contained in these documents, ultimately, as the development of approval authority, it's our responsibility to start to lay out those parameters, and that's what I'm comfortable that we've done that in the document as it's written today.
Okay, and that was literally my last question is, do you feel confident with that? I mean, when you're talking about Track A and Track B, you're going to have between 700 and 1,000 residents here, right? Depending on how many people they have it. Those people are going to bring more development down the road that you have to be prepared for, and you feel comfortable, then thank you.
Exactly. The conditions we're in right now, and this was a big part of the debate at the Planning and Zoning Board, is that we want to make sure that the cumulative impacts of the project are addressed. And these conditions, subject to the actual design and the permitting, subject to a formal traffic study that's ultimately submitted, that we're taking care of these issues. Bigger picture, these traffic studies, when we look at final concurrency, we're going to be looking as far east as Cumbie Road and 92, and probably as far west as maybe Lake Parker Avenue and 92, so that study area gets bigger. But for our purposes now, it is absolutely critical that we nail down as much as we can what's going on within a block or two of the site.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. So do you see that time frame as what, to be able to do the adequate study that you need to be able to?
Typically, it would be a 3 or 4 month process because you've got to collect the traffic counts. What we typically do is we work with DOT and the county closely on the methodology for the traffic study so that everybody's requirements are being met in one document, so they're not having to go around from agency to agency. We also want to make sure, like in this instance, we want to make sure that the counts are collected generally when school is in session. When traffic volumes are more normal. I mean, we have had studies here recently where we have had to use traffic counts from 2016, 2017, 2018 because of COVID. The volumes have been unusual. So it takes a while to go through all that. And the good news is the developer has provided the distribution assumptions, and they look reasonable. So that takes one big step out of the process that would normally otherwise have to be done. So really at this point, it's getting the traffic counts and getting the actual analyses done for the roadway segments and the intersections.
Thank you.
Mayor Mutz, did you have a question earlier?
I was just going to make a comment. First of all, Commissioner Music, that was the Barnaby Cliff Notes, just so you know, and that's because of his thoroughness and for which we're all appreciative. Secondly, this is a great example, I think, of our city staff and community development doing a great job of taking a workforce housing opportunity and creating a neighborhood that really kind of got both elements of what they wanted to accomplish. Less that the developer wanted to accomplish apparently, and more that the city wanted to have influence. And I love the way, as Commissioner Madden was pointing out, that we are looking at a greenway access for that workforce housing. So when you think about this and you think about some neighborhoods that we have to build along the way that create something between affordable, multifamily that is supplemented, and then affordable housing that is maybe has more generously sized lots. This is also a need for members of our community as we grow. And when you think about this land being unused since 1920 effectively for much successfully, it also allows more residents in our growing city to be able to work. So if the traffic considerations can be accomplished, then to me it is something that's extremely favorable to pursue.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Madden.
So, not to be completely abusive, but I just, working with the CRA and knowing, that corridor is such a place that we are hoping for revitalization, and with the pedestrian walkways that you've been working on at the traffic, Chuck, and then also with just, the new Tapatios and the Coney Funeral Home, to have this kind of be on the bookend on the other side with new residents who hopefully will walk that corridor and go to those, retail establishments and just really give us, two major bookends to work with to then revitalize that whole corridor. So this gets me really excited. I'm thrilled that we have a developer that is willing, to make modifications and make it as beautiful a product as possible for those residents that are going to live there, and then, for us to be able to give more eaters and shoppers to all of the retail establishments on that corridor. So I'm really excited.
Other questions for Teresa or Chuck? Okay. Thank you. All right, Attorney Davis.
Okay, well, Teresa loads up the map for the next two. 3 and 4 are related to an office building that you're all familiar with. It's just to the south of the McDonald's at Grove Park there. So this is giving some land use and new zoning to that property. Teresa.
So wait just a second, Teresa. So we covered both 1 and 2 with that? With the last discussion?
Yes, it's the same project. One's the amendment to the comp plan, and the other is zoning.
Just want clarity for the public. Thanks.
All right, so this is what was formerly the Tremont Center on US 98 South. And today is the office for Saunders, Ralston, and Dantzler, and also the Central Florida Development Council. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the property. Here is current building that occupies the site. And again, the request is for zoning and land use to allow for, on the front part of the property, where there's currently only office uses allowed, to provide for some limited commercial in that area. And then on the back part of the property, where it has residential zoning, to change that to office, to allow, again, for that mix of uses near the office to support the limited commercial up front, should this ever redevelop. So again, with this one, because of its location along 98, transportation was key. Compatibility with the residences to the south and to the west was also of concern. But we are comfortable with office uses being a good buffer from the more heavily commercial 98 frontage over to the west. This one did have some conditions dealing with transportation that were incorporated, and then also, again, those limits on the uses. So there were certain uses that we felt would not be appropriate within that area due to the surrounding residential. And for example, high turnover restaurants were a concern, not only for compatibility, but then also for trip generation. But it does allow for fast casual restaurants rather than quick service. So it would allow for a Panera with a drive-through rather than a McDonald's with a drive-through. So this one was recommended by the Planning and Zoning Board for approval, also with a 6-0 vote.
Do we have questions? Yes, Commissioner Mosley.
Thank you. Did we have any feedback from the 5 neighbors that backs up to? Was there any concerns there of?
From the neighbors here off of Fredericksburg, I don't recall. Chuck may recall. I know we did from neighbors to the south, because this application, when it originally came in, it included the holdings of the Lou Hall and the family, so the funeral home property. And they were trying to do a larger unified development. So there were some concerns from the neighbors farther down 98 and to the west. But I don't recall anyone immediately adjacent to this boundary speaking this request.
I think there was a fence that had been removed, and one of the neighbors had a concern about that, and that was something that had happened probably a year or two ago prior, and so the buffering conditions would address those comments.
Other questions? The mayor have a question? I can't
Oh,
see.
no, we can't see him. Let's see if we can get him.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any questions or comments?
I do not.
Okay, we couldn't see you. Okay, thank you, Attorney
You have to be
Davis.
grateful for good benefits like that.
Okay, yeah, so 3 was the amendment to the future land use map for that project. Number 4 was the accompanying zoning for that. So we're down to number 5, which is a change in zoning from O1 to C1. Recognize some existing commercial uses up on Kathleen Road. Teresa?
This one is a relatively simple request. Unlike the others being planned unit developments, this was a request for what we call standard zoning. So taking a basic zoning designation of O1 and changing it to C1, which is commercial, again, for limited retail uses because of the surrounding neighborhood up here at the northern end of the city limits. This is an existing business. It's the MFD Pawn and Jewelry Store. And the owner really wanted to allow for future flexibility for if he has a tenant come in or wants to sell the property for commercial uses, to allow for that additional retail component. So again, this one, relatively non-controversial. I don't recall anyone coming out from the surrounding neighborhood to speak on it. And again, this would allow flexibility for that property owner going forward.
Any questions for Teresa on this property? Seeing none, move on.
Okay, the next item, number 6, is a modification of a conditional use to allow the reuse of the old St. Joseph's Catholic Church on Frank Lloyd Wright Way, going back even further, Southside Baptist Church. So Teresa will go through that one.
Right, so the current church campus, church and school campus, actually is primarily the school campus. You see extends all the way up to Riggins, down to the south side of Frank Lloyd Wright Way. Just run through some photos here. So this is what was the former sanctuary for Southside Baptist. This is looking to the north and west from Frank Lloyd Wright Way and South Boulevard. This is looking south across Frank Lloyd Wright Way. The Dean House would be off to your left as you're looking across the road here. And that's an existing parking lot. This is another parking area, although a grassed parking area that's on the south side of Frank Lloyd Wright Way, across from the sanctuary and at the southwest corner of South Boulevard. This is a view looking north on Pennsylvania. So you see the classroom building on the right, and then single-family homes on the left, and what was a queuing area for pickup and drop-off for the school. Again, just looking at the north there. You've probably heard some conversations about dumpster locations related to this development. So this is an existing dumpster on Pennsylvania up on the north end of the classroom building. As part of this request, there is a consolidation, removing that dumpster that was just shown and then placing a larger dumpster at the Colony Arms Apartments to the east, which the college also owns. These are the existing play fields up at Ridgewood, and the butterfly garden that is at on South Boulevard. So this is a plan of the overall campus. Again, Florida Southern College is proposing to repurpose this for a graduate nursing program. That'll be the primary use within the building. At maximum capacity, the program would have 400 students. I think currently they're looking at somewhere in the 100 seat range for those programs. The classroom building would be used primarily for those purposes, and its existing parking areas would all remain with the exception of being brought up to current standards with regard to buffering of those parking areas. Back here, whoops. This was discussed by the Lake Morton Neighborhood Association at one of their meetings, and they did submit a letter where they were overall in support of it, but having concerns about the overall appearance of the buildings remaining unchanged except for minor cosmetic changes. Preservation of the athletic field and the butterfly garden, and concerns about any parking that is supportive of the college not being used for commercial uses that may come in, and particularly if the Dean House was ever to be proposed for a commercial endeavor. So taking those concerns into consideration, staff developed conditions and the Planning and Zoning Board recommended approval of these. So again, the principal use will be that graduate school program. On the college side, they have concern about the fact that, especially in light of recent events with COVID, you may have a situation where they're in need of classroom space maybe for a limited time if they have to move around some rooms or some programs on the main campus. So they didn't want to be fully limited and not able to occasionally have someone who's not in a graduate program come into the building. And for code enforcement purposes, that would be very hard to enforce. So the condition again is principal use, graduate programs, but does allow for the occasional use of spaces for other activities that are not necessarily at the graduate school program level. The maximum enrollment is capped at 400. You can see the landscaping and buffering again on the parking areas will be brought up to current code. Existing open space will be retained. And the solid waste collection bin, again, will be consolidated over at Colony Arms. I believe that solid waste has already replaced that dumpster with a plastic lid because of the noise that was being generated when it would be emptied. And then as part of the reconstruction of the St. Joseph campus, they will also improve the dumpster enclosure at Colony Arms so that the back wall will be masonry to help lessen the noise. And then the college also will be changing out the fence materials on the sides and putting a gate with a lock so that only the driver of the truck would be able to gain access to the front of the dumpster. And then, of course, the residents of Colony Arms would have a separate gate to access to put in their trash. So the college has done quite a bit to respond to the concerns of the neighborhood. And, even as far as trying to address specific neighbor concerns related to this dumpster. And with these conditions, we feel that the impacts will be mitigated with regard to solid waste and will be far less than the current or the prior school use that was at this location.
Are there questions for Teresa? Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Thank you, Teresa. Couple questions on Pennsylvania. Will they remove that sign that says you can't go in there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yes.
That street will be open all day.
Correct, and those queuing spaces or the queuing lanes will actually be converted to on-street parking spaces.
Again, my only concern obviously is with the diet plan going into place. I'm getting more and more and more feedback from that our interior streets along this Florida Avenue are getting heavier used from that standpoint. But again, I think you mentioned that they're going to try to keep the athletic fields as open space as well as the butterfly garden. I like that. and I guess all the other parking lots. And I'm pleased that they're going to move the garbage station and make it a little more sightly. It's going to move more to on this side. I'm not sure where it's going to be moved. I couldn't quite understand where you were saying it was going to go.
All right, so this is the sanctuary building here in the center. Here's the butterfly garden. Here's the existing dumpster that serves the apartment building. So they're going to remove this one, and then this one here at the apartment building is being enlarged. And then the enclosure is being reconstructed to meet current code requirements.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Music?
Teresa, thank you. Do you, you said that the usage of this is less than it was with the school. You're talking about just the student population?
Not only numbers, but also the traffic impact. So obviously with a, grade school student population, there's more traffic generated with pickup and drop off versus, adults who are driving there on their own, parking in the parking lots rather than queuing up on those areas adjacent to the streets. And also the times are staggered, so it's not, where you have the set schedule of the school day. With the elementary school, you have classes occurring throughout the day and into the evening, and at a lower number of students there at any one time, given the nature of the programming being graduate level.
And as I'm reading here, 400 students max, 100 estimated to be there at any time. Just because the school caps the maximum number of students in a program doesn't mean that's the max number of students that could be on that campus building, correct? I mean, that just means, they could be, I guess the concern I have is the use that they're trying to get where, hey, on occasion if we need to do this, or on occasion if we need to do that. We're not really binding anything if we're just saying, yes, on occasion you can do that. That's a pretty wide open template for them to be able to have more people. And when it was a school or when it was a church, it was much more regulated times, like you said, where this could be opened up for a lot of activities, potentially.
Right. It's, again, the way the condition reads, so it's, graduate level academic programs. And I think that's clear that that's what their intent is to use it for. I think, again, what their concern was, and also on our staff side concern is, enforcing a graduate, saying it's only for graduate level uses. Have an undergraduate student walk through the building or come in for if they have some common areas. Limiting it to a certain age group or educational level is difficult for someone to just, observing a person, be able to say, yes, they're a graduate student or they're an undergraduate student. So
absolutely, yeah. And my concern isn't so much that we're policing the people that are on site as much as it is just because the program is allowing 400 students doesn't mean that's the cap of the building of the people on site. So I wasn't concerned necessarily, or just about the potential of, once we, and obviously you'd have the same situation when it was a church, right? If the church grows, you start at 200 and you've got 1,000. I understand that. I'm trying to wrap my head around when we have, or we open the door for exceptions, when those exceptions are not defined, it can potentially lead a problem. But, I always default back to the neighbors, right? If the neighbors don't have an issue, if the neighborhood did the research, they did their due diligence talking, certainly I would default to them.
Commissioner
And what these conditions do is also ensure that if there is a problem, that we can come back and say, well, it's graduate level. If they, I don't think there's any possibility of them having all undergraduate programming there because their purpose is strictly for this nursing program. But if there are problems, the conditions are strong enough that we can say, hey, this has gone beyond what the use is allowed.
Excellent, thank you.
Also, with the campus down the street, I would say you're not going to have student government activities at that site. They would be housed on the main campus. You know what I mean? So there would be, if there are activities that are growing bigger and bigger, they have a campus just down the street that can be accessed for that type of gathering or activity or anything, but I understand exactly
Yeah.
what you're
I
saying.
mean, it's such a big open space, meaning the buildings, right? Sanctuaries are not classrooms, they're big, so lending itself to big gatherings is certainly a possibility just because of the square footage of the space.
Yeah.
So.
Commissioner Madden.
And I should have mentioned too that the sanctuary, so they have asked for the ability to be able to lease that out to a church that may be starting up. And so that is addressed in the conditions as well. And that is, let me see what the limit is on that. Because that's allowed today. I mean, if St. Joseph had their sanctuary there, that would have been allowed. So now it's clarifying that it can only occur at different times than academic activities. So Sundays or Wednesday evenings.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you. That actually answered that. I was going to ask if there was any other multi-use for the auditorium part of the church. But the second question is, you mentioned the Dean House. That's certainly not a part of this property, but are they buying the Dean House as well to be a part of this?
No, I just think the neighborhood, after the last attempt to convert that home to a commercial or non-residential use, we're concerned that a use could be allowed if they could find the appropriate parking, because that's kind of what limited the Dean House previously from its conversion. So they just wanted to make sure that the college wouldn't enter into an agreement with someone to allow them to park on their parking lot in order to support a commercial use of Dean House. But no, Dean House is not being acquired by the college.
All right. Seeing no further questions, we can go back to City Attorney.
Okay, I'll do the song and dance while Teresa loads up the next one. The next item is a conditional use for an adult daycare and vocational training facility on property that's just immediately northeast of the Lone Palm property.
Right. So this is probably another building that's familiar to you. This is the former auto owners building on Memorial. You can see it here shaded. And the request is to convert this 20,000 square foot building into a facility for the Alliance for Independence in order to conduct their independent living skills and vocational training for adults. So it's a good repurposing of this building. Will have fewer impacts in terms of traffic than the prior use. And with this conditional use, there are general conditions just outlining what the use is, limiting it to 120 clients, providing for certain bicycle facilities and ADA improvements to be made, and cross-access agreement with the property to the east. And while it's not required by the conditions, there is a condition in here that provides for the typical permitting with the agency having control over the adjacent roadway, which in this case is DOT. And I understand that as the engineer is going through all the review processes required for redevelopment of this property, that DOT at this time is saying they need to remove the existing driveway here and only have access through the property to the east. That's a pretty strong position that DOT has taken at this point, but I would think that the engineer would be pursuing that to keep that driveway open. I know that Chuck's been working closely with them to provide justification to allow for that driveway to remain, especially since these are now going to be two separate businesses operating side by side, each with their own needs, and particularly with Alliance for Independence having a need for circulating vehicles for pickup and drop off through their parking lot. But other than that issue that's kind of out there on the side, with regard to the request for the conditional use, it's recommended for approval with the conditions.
Questions? Does the mayor have anything, Kevin?
Let's get him up here. Nope.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Teresa. Okay, Palmer.
That's all the land use ordinances for this one. The next item is an amendment to the city's pole attachment ordinance, which simply conforms the rates that we charge for attachments to our utility poles to the recent change in the state legislation related to broadband attachments. The legislature just passed legislation to try to encourage, the service of your broadband service to underserved areas. And as part of that, they have provided that municipal utilities can only charge $1 per attachment per pole per year if that attachment is necessary to serve underserved or unserved areas. And that promotional rate would apply until July of 2024. Ramona, did I get it?
No,
or
that's
miss
right,
anything?
and that would also be only applicable to new attachments according to the legislation, and this is a product, I think that is a much better product than what we started with the telecom companies going and fighting and trying to pick away at our authority. So this just provides that promotional rate, as Palmer said, for a limited period of time, and it also preserves the safety standards that we would require, and also to provide a pole attachment agreement, which you'll see at the next, this comes back for second reading, we'll also have a pole attachment agreement that we are going to be having, I guess it was a couple months ago already that we did the amendment to the pole attachment ordinance, and that will apply to that as well. So you'll be having that to review.
Who deems what is an underserved area?
The legislature actually defines that in the statute. It's underserved and unserved, and it's based on, I think, the speed of internet, but then that is kind of a question I think that staff's been looking at, but I don't know if Cindy's on here as well, but I think that would be probably documentation that would come from the state at some point, and what we looked at it, and I think they said it was about 391 poles that we would be impacted. So the impact's minimal, but there is some question, I think, of how we would document that, and so we're still processing that.
I just think that would be hard to govern.
But based on the speeds, I think that how they define underserved and unserved, we assess to 391 poles are what our impact would be with regard to this promotional rate, which would apply.
So which agency would that fall under in the state legislation? That wouldn't be DVPR, and it wouldn't be, it might be DEO, maybe, Economic Opportunity? Okay, I would just be curious of how that, I know y'all are looking at it, so when you do have that, if you'll shoot it out, that'd be awesome. I'd like to know who's gonna manage that. Yes, Commissioner Madden?
Yes, so I know it initially was to expand rural broadband, and then before we did the audit of our poles, like poles that are in rural denoted areas, but it became problematic when you think about unserved or underserved, if it's new development, like the development we just talked about, that currently doesn't have any broadband, and then now when you put poles in that area, do they all get it for $1 a piece because there's no broadband currently? It's a new development, it's a new attachment, not necessarily would be underserved or unserved.
It would certainly be unserved.
Yeah. Right, but I'm just saying, like, it's not like digital
The
divide
parameters, right.
motivated. You know what I'm saying? Like, someone would have built internet in there anyway on Memorial Boulevard in a new development. But does this then open a loophole for them to get dollar attachments? Because it's a new development now and we have this new, that's what we're concerned about. Because certainly we care about the digital divide and we like rural broadband because we know that those broadband, providers cannot get an ROI when they light up, a road a mile long for 3 users. So that is kind of, the goal is to expand it to places that are not financially feasible for the providers, which is great, but it's not to give them loopholes so that we don't get the cost to harden our poles for hurricanes and do the things that we need to do to keep our workers, protected at the same time, so.
Commissioner Music.
Thank you. So their promotional rate is $1 per wire tie. What is it if it's not a promo? I mean, what is it normally?
It's around $25 per pole per year.
Okay, wow. That's significant.
Yeah, it becomes a big number when you look at all the poles that Spectrum, for example,
300-something
is attaching
poles,
to.
that adds up pretty quick. Yeah.
Which is why the telecoms and the internet providers wanted it
Yeah.
that way.
Well, on occasion, my house feels underserved, so,
I know.
I'd like to.
Exactly.
Yeah, depending on where we live.
Mhm.
So going from 25 to 1?
Yes.
Okay.
For new attachments.
And that does term out, if I'm reading this
It
correctly.
does,
Okay, so it is
yes.
okay.
Yes.
Other questions for Ramona on that? Our guru of all things utility.
I don't know about guru.
Thanks, Ramona.
All right, the last ordinance is pretty much just a housekeeping matter. It is amending the police pension ordinance to just catch up with IRS regulations, which require minimum distributions to begin at age 72 instead of 70 and a half. It also recognizes that any savings to the plan as a result of the city issuing pension obligation notes, if you'll remember, we took advantage of some lower interest rates and acquired a bond essentially to pay off the city's contribution to the city, to the different pension plans. Any savings as a result of that would be shared by the police officers participating in the plan and the city on a one-to-one basis.
Questions for Palmer on that? Okay.
All right, under resolutions, the first item is simply formalizing the equalization rule, once again, for situations where the city is having to go out and cut or clear lots. The second item is part of the prepayment of the hospital lease. The hospital is going to be issuing new bonds in order to finance that $215 million payment to the city. And as part of that, they're going to refund some existing bonds that are outstanding. So this is simply provides for that. The city served as a conduit when bond issues were issued in 2011 and 2015 for improvements on the hospital property. We have really very little involvement in that, no liability associated with that, but it allows them to achieve more favorable interest terms. So that's why it's having to come through the city to provide for the refunding of those bonds.
Questions, comments?
Do you know how much they're going to borrow totally?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to pay for most of that prepayment, though.
Just a couple $100 million.
Yeah, just a couple.
Other questions? Creative. All right, miscellaneous reports.
All right, the first item was on consent, so we're to the second item, which is an engineering services agreement with Hazen and Sawyer to design some new pumps as well as a chlorine contact chamber for the Glendale Water Treatment Facility. Robbie Kniss is in the room, so I'll let him explain the technical matters, but this is going to be in two phases. First, Hazen and Sawyer is going to help us with acquiring a state revolving loan to finance the design for this project. And then once we get that, then we would move into phase two, which would be the design. And that would be so the first phase, we're going to pay Hazen and Sawyer $70,475 for. Once we get the state revolving fund, we would then be able to finance the actual final design and permitting of this project for $1.1 million. So Robbie, can you just explain quickly what we're doing?
Yes, I'm Robbie Kniss, Manager of Engineering.
Robbie, can you do us a favor? The speaker's here. Could you come up here and speak so those joining us virtually can hear? Thank you.
Thank you.
Robbie Kniss, Manager of Engineering for Water Utilities. So we're replacing ultimately two pump stations. One of them is having a lot of problems. We've actually been buying parts on eBay, of all places, pretty much exhausted all sources. And the other one's not far behind. It's been having a lot of problems as well. So we started this project to replace it. The important piece is we're going to DEP state revolving loan, which is how we funded several other projects, which is why this project is broken down into a couple of different phases. So the first phase we'll fund ourselves. DEP won't pay us or reimburse us to do the initial design and conceptual type stuff. So we fund that ourselves. Part of putting all that package together and making that request is paid by us, but the consultant will help us with that. So they'll go to DEP, get the design loan, and then once we get the design loan, and we'll be coming back to you multiple times because there's always resolutions and other things to get this loan application approved. Then we'll start the real design, move on with that. We've broken it into different phases. We're trying to fast track this thing and hit, and I can't remember now if it's this August or next August, but there's several different funding cycles with DEP. You know, they have all their money up front. Whatever money doesn't get claimed rolls over to the next cycle. So ideally, you want to hit that first cycle. So that's what we're pushing for, and that's why we're fast tracking, willing to spend that $70,000 up front. And we probably could get by a little cheaper if we wanted to, but we're just going to try and get the conceptual done to move forward to get all the way to the final design. So this project's 2 pump stations. We have the one pump station pumps all the reuse over to McIntosh. It gets consumed, and what doesn't get consumed comes back. And then we have the second pump station down near Lowe's, and that's what pumps everything down to the wetlands. And mixed in with that is we have to chlorinate the water and maintain chlorine residuals. And right now, we don't have a chlorine contact chamber, so that's really just a maze. The water wiggles back and forth through this, and it allows the water and the chlorine to mix and not have to over-chlorinate or under-chlorinate. Today, we tell DEP that this gets accomplished in the pipe, which is really just a straight pipe, so the chlorine gets in. There's not really any mixing that takes place. I mean, it does, but like I say, sometimes we've been pinged for not meeting compliance. So we'll end up putting in one station. It'll be a big, long row of pumps with the ability to pump either direction and a chlorine contact chamber at the beginning of it, and so it'll accomplish all of that.
Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. They're getting this interesting stuff here. I don't know not much about your department, to say the least, but is our level of service pretty good? Are we have we got our weight capacity? How much more affluent can we carry? And are we okay for that type of stuff? Or
I'd say yes. So, all of our affluent is used, really, it's kind of committed to McIntosh and Tico, which is way down south of Auburndale. And so certainly we design all of this to comply with the design flow limits of Glendale and Northside.
do you know how many gallons a day we push out?
I think, and it really changes based on rainy weather because we have a lot of inflow and infiltration in our gravity system. But I think generally, and I'm not familiar with the north side numbers, but I'd say Glendale is probably seeing 6 million gallons a day. And in the peak during extremely rainy weather, that can push up to 12, 13 million gallons a day. And during hurricanes, it probably goes way over that, which is extreme situations.
Yes, Commissioner Music.
Thank you. Yeah, I as a new commissioner, got a tour of the north facility and the Glendale, and it's pretty impressive. My question is, looking at the lifespan of these pumps, are we not budgeting? We don't have anything for end of use replacement? I mean, we know they're giving us 35 to 40 years.
Yeah, not in particular. In this case, the new electrical equipment, the MCC room that it would all need to go into is not big enough, which is really what's driving. Let's go look at everything. So there's a lot of times where you build in spares and you can account for those kinds of things. But in this case, we just don't have any extra spare space. And so you try to leave room to build on or to upgrade. And, you might say there's a 30-year life and we try and get more out of that if possible. In this case, we're ending up with a space requirement that we'd have to build a new building down there near Lowe's, and we're like, well, the other station's going to get to that point. Let's just do it all now.
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Yes,
Again, and correct me if I'm wrong there again, the city's got our hands tied behind our back to some degree. We can't have a sinking fund to save money, to do pumps and to improve, because we're supposed to save all that money for our rates and have the rates be down as opposed to saving the money to do stuff in the future. So we have to kind of do it as a line out of budget as we need it. That's so.
Understood, yeah.
Is that a fair statement, is it, Palmer?
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I mean, we do the same thing on the power plant. I assume it works the same way with the.
So we can't save money because we got to give it back if we have it.
Right.
Understood, yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but.
But it sounds good.
Sounds good theory, doesn't it?
Other questions?
No, ma'am.
You do invest at the rate of your depreciation, though, so if you're doing that constantly,
It should equal out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie.
The mayor.
Oh, Mayor, sorry.
I just want to comment on Robbie. Thanks for the great job that you all do and frugalness that you use and the work that you go through to make this service so important to us and do it well. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, appreciate it. All right, Palmer.
So we have two other items that will be considered by the utility committee in about half an hour, so we would just ask that you delay those until then.
Okay, that's under utility, we moved over. All right. All right, well, now we're at the audience portion of the agenda, and then mayor and members of the city commission. Any comments you'd like to share now, or do you want to hold until Monday? Mayor Mutz? Since you're not going to be with us Monday, anything?
No, ma'am, I do not. No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, sir, Commissioner Reed.
One brief thing, and when is the expiration of the diet coming up? I know I'm getting a lot of talk about that, and people want to know when they can protest and when we're going to have the vote. Do we know when that date is up? I think Chuck probably already left, but
I know that we're expecting the report from DOT here shortly. And at that point, we'll begin to see what possible recommendations are coming out of that. And then I think that'll then begin the process of talking with with the commission and DOT and then the public. But I'll find out from
September,
sure.
maybe something before September, something like that.
I think the road didn't open up until late September, and they wanted it to go a full year.
Right.
Yeah.
So it'll be October, December for a week. Okay.
But can we that's a great question. Can we clarify that process? Because DOT will make recommendations to us. We will have a discussion and a vote evidently, but how is that warranted in DOT? Because my understanding is as a state road, it's really up to them whether this continues and how that works.
They do, but they want the city's concurrence. They want the city commission to concur with, or at least support the recommendation. So they want to work with us on it.
So if we don't support the recommendation, then what happens?
Well, the one discussion had been the reason they had constructed the diet the way they have is so that it could be removed. And basically the road, I guess, could return to where it's at. But I think we're at a point that there has to be some improvement out there. And if it's not three-laning, then there has to be some other considerations for pedestrian, as well as there's drainage issues on that roadway that need to be addressed as well. So there would have to be some discussion on some alternative improvements or enhancements if they didn't do the diet as they've been, has been laid out now.
They being DOT.
Right.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you. So, you know, I feel like the public does not get as much information as, you know, preceding the diet, being as on the CRA board, taking a tour over to Orlando, you know, seeing what they did there on that road. You know, it's so beneficial because when you think about the long-term 10-year strategy of that was your north-south thoroughfare, but it went through a historic neighborhood, never intending to be a highway, ever. But with growth, you know, then having the Parkway, and then having Hardin Boulevard, and then now getting the land for the Wabash extension so that Hardin drivers can move to Wabash. That offloads the, you know, South Florida over to Hardin. And then you're left with, this is annoying and it's problematic when you're in the design phase and really no one's walking on it. Businesses aren't going to risk to be in a pedestrian thoroughfare if it's not in fact going to be a pedestrian area. Some risks, like the Born and Bred Bakery, and then you know, at the risk of peril, you know, standing in line on a busy highway. To me, I feel like it's difficult for us one-on-one in the public at Publix or at a meeting, you know, to give the whole breadth and scope of this decision. And when you think about the size of the lanes, you don't make them those size anymore. You can't keep them that size. You know, I wouldn't even want my children to traffic along that as new drivers. It was so narrow. So then what's your next, what else do you do? Take down the buildings, the historic buildings, and then what's right behind the historic building? It's a historic home. So I think that if you see, it's not to disturb the neighbors in the historic home, it's really the goal is to get people who don't live there to take another route north and south of that thoroughfare, to keep it a neighborhood, to improve the neighborhood, to make it pedestrian friendly, to make it walkable, to not have the suburban sprawl that occurred, during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s until now. So we're going backward like a Memorial Boulevard to try to get residents to live next to retail so that they can walk there, instead of having your retail in the middle of town and your suburban neighborhoods so far away everyone has to park and drive and park somewhere. So, I'm trying to say all of this to say it's difficult to say all of that at Publix when I'm talking to someone who's frustrated that they don't like to drive on the, when they pull out of their street, that's obstructive, it's not a good turn angle, they should have a left turn at one of the stoplights. So it would be helpful, if it is FDOT's decision, to do the same kind of education that they did with us as CRA members on a board, to be able to see what happened on Edgewater Drive. All it takes is a, 30-second video to see the progression of how it looked like our South Florida. And so all those retail establishments had for sale or for lease signs in it for a decade, because who in the world would rent that space when they're going to get killed coming out their front door? So if you kind of have an opportunity to talk to FDOT, if they would use some of their funds to do an infographic or to do a short video and see the beautiful video we just saw with the new parkway. What's it called? What we just toured.
Lincoln Central Park.
Yes, Mayor. If we could see a video like that and see this is where we were in the, people who lived here in Lakeland, they didn't go to they didn't think they would drive to Southgate because it was too far south. I mean, that was that road. It can never be a highway. It can't be what Hardin or Bartow Road. It doesn't have the expansion opportunities. So we have to preserve and protect it, and we have to give alternate north and south thoroughfares. But who is going to be the one to explain that to our residents who are just frustrated right now? Because they say, no one's walking. I don't see anybody walking down the street right now. And I'm like, well, who would? It still looks terrible. There's still no retail establishments yet, because they're still waiting on the results as well. Some have Rist, the new crazy kombucha. I think she hopes that everybody will become retail and pedestrian friendly and everyone in the neighborhoods will walk there. But they're probably not going to do it during the test period. And so I just feel like, maybe it's my marketing background, somebody needs to tell the story, somebody needs to give us some pictures or some video, because this is a huge thing that we deal with out in the public, and there's no time to give them even just the little thing I just, gave here at this table, but it would have been a lot better with video and imagery than what I could do right now.
I'll get with Chuck and find out what the process is
That would be
planned,
great.
and then we can also provide DOT with that input you just gave.
I think that would be really helpful, because I know from my perspective, when I'm cornered about it or emailed about it or called about it, I try to say it's not solely, the onus is not solely on the city commission. We have to work in tandem with the state agency, and it's a state road, and the state has its own ways of doing things. And when you try to complain that a road is not compliant or concurrent with state standards, people just gloss. It's like...
They need pictures.
They need pictures, and it's like one more thing that government's not listening to us.
You're kicking the can, aren't you?
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly, when you see pictures...
We built that beautiful website that tells the whole story. Just send people there. We got that whole microsite that we've built. That's awesome. You can slide the sliders. This is what it looks like. This is what it's going to look like. It tells all the information.
On the website.
I'll send it to you guys, the link.
No,
But
that's
that's
great. Because even the CRA took a tour down to Delray Beach recently. Well, great for them. They get to see the sign that says Pineapple District, and they see how this, area is improved because of those attempts. And if we had a little Dixieland sign going over that area and you can imagine that you had more restaurants and retail, but people can't imagine that when they're just frustrated that they can't get off the street.
Yeah, and that's really the problem, right? Is the words that are being thrown out are imagine, they hope that traffic is this, and that really is the problem. Is that when you go to another municipality and see how they've done it, you're hoping that it's concurrent here, and we don't know that it will be.
Well, you sure won't have it if you don't have community buy-in, because who's going to invest money?
And that's exactly it. I think that they have to buy into it. If they don't, we're going to continue to get phone calls, emails, and stopped at Publix, and I think that's going to That's just gonna be the rub, is we're trying to convince somebody of something that isn't
Right.
Right,
of what it could be, and that's difficult.
it is. Yes, Commissioner?
Thank you. There again,
Thank you for that can of worms.
the aesthetics of the design and stuff, look good, but there again, it still doesn't tell you that you can get across Florida Avenue. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. People just cannot get where they want to go, and they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and I did the same thing, and it's putting more traffic on. We're getting road bumps or road combos on every street going on either side of the road now, and they probably need more, but.
Well, to wrap up the road diet discussion, there was a nice lady who flashed her lights and let me turn into the Dixon Post Office yesterday, and I just want to thank her. She was in a white Tiguan VW. You were very kind to let me go. Other comments and questions or anything else? Yes, ma'am, Commissioner.
So I said a couple, talking of can of worms, I've had a lot of emails about the Amazon expansion. I'm sure everyone else has after the public hearing.
What are you talking about?
Right. And so I'm just curious, and this is not a Stephanie Madden wants to do this at all. I told Jean Conrad, when I send you videos and emails, it's not because I don't appreciate all the hard work that you do. It's because that's what I get to hear, and it's my obligation to share those wonderful, suggestions with our airport director. So I have been asked a lot about why wouldn't this be, because their growth was, faster than expected. We're thinking of this more like a 10-year plan of expansion, and now it's rapidly expediting because of, everyone's using e-commerce due to COVID. Whether they will or not, in the coming years when COVID's gone, we don't know, but right now they want to expand. And, at what point is what I've been asked by citizens, is this something that would be this disruptive, to our neighbors and to our city, become something that would be put on a referendum for a vote?
So the question is, can it be put on a referendum for a vote?
Yes, what constitutes a referendum vote? What has been done in the past? Is this just has the kind of disruptive nature that we need to say, we need our city to agree that we want Amazon, not only Amazon, but commercial air, we're going to have their airplanes, so that.
Yeah, the city charter gives the city commission wide latitude to put something on a ballot, for a referendum vote.
Okay.
You'd have to adopt an ordinance and specify what the issue is and come up with ballot language. On the Amazon thing, that gets a little tricky in that there is an existing lease with contractual rights. A referendum cannot negate existing legal rights that a party might have. So the question is, would it accomplish anything to put that issue on a ballot for a referendum?
Right, and I've been saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I could get with you later, Palmer, about, them having particular legal rights as a contract, but it sounds to the public like this is up to the city commission to decide whether they can do this expansion or not, which would go to how many planes now, to 44 planes. So is it their legal right to go to 44 planes, or is it the city commission decision to let them go to 44
I'm still looking at that issue, so let me continue to look at that.
Okay.
I mean, if there is some discretion, then it might make more sense to put it on for a referendum, or the city commission simply makes that decision.
The mayor has a question. Mayor Metz?
Well, I'd like to weigh in on this, and I want to do it with a great deal of empathy, because I know none of us like flights that are 2,000 feet over our heads coming across the community. And in reality, that is the scenario most people are responding to. The appropriate approaches that are available for us through FAA approval and designation that we can probably have in place by December, which we're making a formal application for to the FAA, are the kinds of things that will be very tolerant for residents and normal. We've had some planes that were brought in after midnight, 2 of them specifically, that were units that were off schedule that had to come in because they wanted to have maintenance done in here rather than to have that done elsewhere because we were the nearest. And they were brought in low because Tampa Air Traffic Control gets off our tower and designates what they want that approach to look like. When the FAA tells Tampa Airport Authority what the routes look like, then it's not going to be something they can do less discriminately. But in some of the cases, and particularly any of the ones that are noisy that occur, they're 5.5 miles out, brought in at 2,000 feet straight across the city, requires power to stay under power the entire time until they get to the airport because they have no gradient descent. We don't want that to be the ultimate course for any of the larger airplanes that land at the airport, irrespective of Amazon. But as Palmer knows in the struggle of this, the authority to land planes that want to land in your airport, when the FAA is the one who funds the runways, is not ultimately really very controllable by us. We can have influence on this, but probably not controllable. Airports are public facilities across the United States to be used as they need to be used, as long as the air traffic control provides the authority and the descents. So because we are working on something very proactively that we feel very positively will be successful, very likely will be successful, this really is a deferral to let's see what we get done. And the implementation of that, and I'm saying some of this, I know that you know, but in case some of it hasn't been said, the implementation of that is probably December-ish. In other words, the decision will be made October, November-ish by the FAA, and then they make a final decision to us and then implement that authority. And those will follow parkways and longer descents and make turns that line up with the runway at the end. Utilize the Category 3 ILS, which they've spent millions and millions of dollars putting in place because of the fact that this is a strategic airport. And between Tampa and Orlando, as Florida grows, this will remain a strategic airport. And it isn't limited to Amazon. It's easy for us to take the shots at Amazon right now because obviously they want the growth and they've been the ones that were brought in on these low altitude landings. But the reality is that there can be commercial air carriers that come in with respect to that too. So what we want to have happen is what should happen if an airport's growing in a healthy way that respects the citizens' desires to have normalcy with airport noise. And, you know, we all know if you live closer to the airport, it's going to be noisier than if you live farther away. I'm a house that those planes go right over, and I understand this sound that is objectionable, but I will also encourage us to just stay the course and allow the FAA to do their work. And once we know what that conclusion is, then we can be much more confident about where we're going in terms of the kinds of things we want to see occur on a long-term basis.
We have about 9 minutes till 11.
So I just think since we had the public hearing, it'd be awesome, either whether this is a Kevin on the communication side or if this is a city attorney, you know, just so we are on the same page. You know, people forget we can't talk to the third chance, you know, and I'm getting a lot of emails. I don't want to say the wrong thing legally, what we can or cannot do. I was getting a lot of wonderful information from Gene Conrad. He was answering me, giving me feedback so that I could formulate emails and responses that I felt were appropriate. Since the conversation last week, I'm getting a lot more emails that it's not just the landing, it is maybe they don't like Amazon at all, they think it's destroying small businesses, they think they're a socialist company, whatever it is that they think about Amazon. So I just need to know what the appropriate facts are, like, sorry, that's a done deal, we've already signed that contract, we have no right to do anything differently. I just need to know legally and from a communication side what, as a city commissioner, so that I can give that to the appropriate person. Do they need to go tell the federal government, you know, talk about monopolies? Or is that something that, you know, the city commission has any purview over? You know, going forward, that'd be very helpful because I'm just getting more and more of those, and I want to be able to respond appropriately.
We'll put together a statement.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Briefly, what I tell people, I said, listen, we haven't really expanded the footprint of the airport anymore. We're just trying to fill it up. And invariably, I said, do you like traveling on I-4? And what are you going to get from that? No. I said, ultimately, we're going to have commercial airlines here, so you can not have to go to Tampa, Orlando. And if you're going to, it's just inevitable with the growth of Florida, Central Florida, it's coming, and it's just a lesser of the evils, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
I would just like to confirm on that. Having some talking points that are unified would be very, very helpful so that we're not accidentally running off the reservation.
Yeah. Going rogue. We don't want to go rogue. Thank
We need a 5-minute
Yep,
break
well,
so we can
okay,
change
all
our technology.
All right, so we're going to adjourn now, and then we'll be back in here at 11 a.m.
Thank you.
Our agenda study's over, so we're gonna just do
Yes,
this. Okay, good.
You want to open up another can of worms?
No, I'm done. I just wanna make sure